Good morning, Biology 102. Today we are looking at the endocrine system. The endocrine system's overall function is to produce hormones. There's about a dozen glands in your body that help produce these particular chemical signals and regulators. And this system is important for controlling whole body activities or regulatory activities. A lot of your homeostatic functions and things like that will be controlled in part by this particular system. So there are 12 glands in this particular system, and they secrete lots of different hormones. We're going to go through a few of these so that you see and get a picture of how these hormones regulate your body. So let's begin today. And our first slide here is just an overview. So you'll be doing an overview on your endocrine system study sheet. And so look back at this. This might be a good place in BB Learn to look so that you get just all the hormones and their functions all together and the glands that secrete them. So look back at this. This can be kind of a helpful slide to look back at. All right, so we're going to start with the brain at the top of the body and then work down slowly. And we're going to do the brain in this first part, and then we'll do all the rest of the glands and hormones in part 2 of the endocrine system. So let's start in the center of the brain and the top of your head with the hypothalamus. This is kind of the master gland inside of the endocrine system. The hypothalamus controls not only the pituitary directly that is connected to it inside of your brain, but it controls a lot of the different glands under it. And so it has a very regulatory and almost like kind of master gland or Mac Daddy sort of gland of the human body and helps us regulate our body. Now, hanging down from your hypothalamus is the posterior and anterior pituitary. These are almost like lobes that sort of dangle down. They're very small, and you can kind of see them over here in this picture. You can see the hypothalamus and then your pituitary. This is showing an enlarged pituitary, but it shows you these like kind of lobes that hang down. Posterior pituitary stores and secretes hormones made by the hypothalamus, so it's kind of directed by that hypothalamus and highly connected to it. Anterior can synthesize some of its own hormones, but still waits for a signal, either a releasing hormone or inhibiting hormone from the hypothalamus to tell it when to release and when not to release its hormones. So it's still, that hypothalamus is still directing the traffic of these particular hormones. All right, let's start with the posterior pituitary. We have already talked about this one when we talked about the urinary system and water balance. And so the hypothalamus makes a hormone that you've heard of, antidiuretic hormone or ADH, and this hormone travels to the kidneys, but first it goes through the posterior pituitary. So over in this picture, you can see how these vessels are connecting it to the posterior pituitary, and then blood vessels run past that. So when your brain notices that water might be like sort of limited inside of the body, it secretes this ADH. It travels in the bloodstream to your kidneys. And remember, it raises those water gates so that your kidneys are more likely to reabsorb water in the presence of high amounts of ADH and prevent dehydration. So you bring that water back in. The posterior pituitary also secretes a couple of other things that I want to mention, prolactin and oxytocin. These are milk production and labor delivery hormones. And so you will see these kind of at the end of a pregnancy in a human, either for the beginning of the milk production or the actual birth of the child. If we move from the posterior pituitary to the anterior pituitary, there's a whole other set of hormones. Again, some of these are synthesized right there in this pituitary and then wait for a signal from the hypothalamus to release them. But some of these hormones are follicle stimulating hormone or FSH or luteinizing hormone LH. These are in control of, in part, of egg and sperm production, and for females, some of that like sort of menstrual cycling that happens every month. There's also a thyroid stimulating hormone. So this is a way for the brain to have some control over this butterfly-shaped gland that we'll talk about in part 2 called the thyroid. There's also endorphins produced here. These mask pain. So if you've ever had like a runner's high or those kinds of hormones that make you feel good, mask your pain as you're doing something difficult, those are often this endorphin class. And anterior pituitary also produces produces growth hormone. And you might already be done growing. And so for adults, growth hormone is more about repairing damage from the day and repairing tissues that haven't like sort of had some sort of damage or problems with them. But growth hormone also helps control our growth over the period of our entire life cycle. So those periods of like early childhood and puberty when you're growing a lot and adding cells and mass, height, and these kinds of things to your body. You can have excess growth hormone. I show a couple of pictures over here. One way to get sort of acromegaly or like sort of very tallness is producing too much of this growth hormone. And there are some forms of dwarfism that are genetically sort of like achondroplasia, so they're genetic mutations and things like that. But there's also some just too little growth hormone being produced. And then there are a few forms of sort of shortened stature that occur because of this limit in this growth hormone. All right, if we go from the pituitary, the last gland in the brain that I want to mention is the pineal gland. And the pineal gland secretes a hormone called melatonin. And melatonin controls your sleep and wake cycles. Hormones control a lot of different things in your body and regulate a whole bunch of different things. But melatonin wakes us up in the morning and puts us to bed at night. We typically secrete a lot of it at night, and it helps control that like sort of regulatory way and the patterns of sleep that we have. All right, this is part 1 of the endocrine system, and these are the glands that I wanted to discuss in the brain. In part 2, we will look at things below the brain that are secreting hormones. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.